When our best fur friends leave our world, many of us are left wanting one last scritch, one last hug, one last walk together. One Last Network is a space for pet guardians to honor their pets in their senior years and to cope with the days leading up to and after their passing. Here's your host, Angela Schneider, founder of One Last Network and Big White Dog Photography in Spokane, Washington.
Welcome to One Last Network and the art of walking through grief with grace. Reverend Jennifer Cormier is a grief coach and earth-based ceremonial artist who brings 20 years of experience in the healing arts to help her clients move through life transitions and grief. She is committed to the revolution of how we view death and walk with grief. The creator of a program called Walk Through Grief with Grace, she wants us all to shift our perspective to include our body in our grieving processes and see grief as a creative collaborator in our lives. That's when we open the door to healing and peace, according to Jenn. Jenn joins me today to discuss grief and grace and how we can use creative writing, nature, movement, and more to release the pain of grief and bring us closer to healing. Have a listen. Good morning, Reverend Jenn Cormier. How are you today?
I'm doing well, Angela. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about all the things you do in moving people through their grief journey. Why don't we start by having you tell us a little about yourself?
Sure. I've given myself the title Grief Guide. I made that title up, although I have gone through a death doula training. I've completed a 2-year interfaith, earth-based, sort of trans-denominational ministerial program that I found myself in after my dad died. My background is really in the arts, performing arts, visual arts, healing arts. I've done a lot of work helping people with pain, physical pain and emotional pain through yoga therapeutics, Pilates therapeutics, breath work, mindfulness, meditation. That's sort of my 20-year career in somatic healing arts. So I really did a lot of work with movement and breath-based healing, we'll say that, through hands-on healing, different types of massage therapy. There are all these things that I wove into my practice for years. And then when my father died, I really, my dad Gil was diagnosed with a stage 4 prostate cancer when he was 57. Oh. And when he got that diagnosis, he and my mom sat me down at the kitchen table. I was visiting. I was at the time living in Oregon. I was in Ashland, Oregon. They were in New Britain, Connecticut. And they gave me this news right after Christmas. Sat me down at the kitchen table and said, we've got some news. And the first doctor had said, you've got about 3 months to live. And I just dropped everything and, told everyone I've got to move back and be with my dad. So I had like a 14-day turnaround where I just packed everything up and moved cross country. And my dad was, I'll just give you this little bit of background, and then I'll just tell you this one more little piece. He was a scientist, and he did a lot of the research around prostate cancer, and said, Jenn, when I look at all this, he had like a big manila folder filled with all the research. He said, every time I open this folder, it's just doom and gloom, and I get so depressed, and I'm sure that folks with family members that have had terminal illness, or folks listening, can relate. And I looked at him and I said, Dad, what if you changed that file name? Because he had a, cancer file across the top. I said, what if you change the file name from cancer file to healing file? And he sat back in his office chair, like his swivel chair. And he said, I like that. I like that. And he took out some old school whiteout, uncapped it, whited out cancer file, blew on it, and then wrote healing file, and dumped all of the research in the recycling. And from that, and that moment, now in retrospect, was a big turning moment for him when I started telling that story, because he was no longer battling cancer. And in the doom and gloom, he had decided to go on a healing journey. And I had I have a lifelong mentor who I had found, 15, 20 years ago, Dr. Louis Malmadrona, who had worked with myself and my dad, in those years. He ended up living 3 years, not 3 months. And Louis said to my dad, you can't always cure, but you can always heal. Hmm. And that really stuck with my dad. And he took his healing journey to heart. And he said, whatever time I've got left, whether I live 20 years or a few months, I'm going to put my energy into healing. And I know I'm going to die at some point, but I'm going to really heal. So part of his healing journey was to get a rescue dog. We hadn't had it. We had a dog when I was in high school named Cody, who had died. And he was in a running group. He was a marathon runner. I mean, this was a shock that he had stage 4 prostate cancer, because he was the picture of health. He prided himself. He had one of those scales that tells you how old you really are. And he would stand on it and be like, I'm really 32, because he was, he ran, I don't know, 6, 7 marathons or something. So, wow. Yeah, he was in this running group, and his friend had said, Gil, my dad is elderly and really frail and got this dog who's part greyhound, and the dog needs to run. And my dad would take the dog out on a leash in the backyard, and this dog, Daisy, would ran around his leg, and he fell and broke his hip or fractured his spine. It was like, so he was in the hospital, needed care. And she said, I've got the dog, but we already have a bunch of dogs. We're looking for someone to foster, my dad's dog, Daisy. And my dad was like, oh, because Louis had said, he had asked him, what's the Native American prescription for healing? Because Louis is Lakota and Cherokee. And the Native American prescription for healing is more singing, more dancing, more kids, and more dogs. Oh. Those were the 4 things. Those are the 4 things you need to heal. So my dad really took this to heart, and especially the kids and the dogs. He had little nieces and nephews he spent a lot of time with, and he had that, little bug in his ear. We don't have a dog. I had a rescue cat that I got off the streets of New York City that was living with my parents. But they didn't have a dog. So he came back and said, I really want to take this dog. And my mom was like, listen, this dog's got to get along with George. If it doesn't, and if we take this dog as a quote unquote, short term, this man is elderly. He's not going to take the dog back, So turns out Daisy did great with kids. She did great with George. George put Daisy in her place, as the sort of boss of the house, this 20-pound cat. And so my dad brought Daisy home, and Daisy was really an integral part of his healing journey, because she got him out into the woods and out into nature every day. So, and because she was part lab, part yellow lab and part greyhound, she had to run in circles around them, So he would take her to the dog park where you could, there was this big field, and just let her off leash, and she'd run in huge circles. And I spent a lot of time, those last years of my dad's life going with him and Daisy to the woods and walking and having her run in circles. And she was really an integral part of his healing at the end of his life. So that was sort of a long introduction of tell us a little bit about you. But I think my journey into grief work really started about, it's been about 15 years since when my dad had gotten that diagnosis. Yeah.
What's the difference between curing and healing?
Yeah. So curing, right? If you're cured of cancer, so say someone receives a diagnosis of breast cancer, right? If you're cured of breast cancer, It means we're stage whatever, stage 2 or 3 or whatever. And then there's a tumor and we take the tumor out and we have all the margins are clear, right? You have skin cancer. We're going to do some surgery. Now the cancer is completely gone and you are cancer free. And now you are cured of cancer.
Right.
And you never have cancer again and you live the rest of your life. So that would be, I'm cured of cancer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or there's a miraculous cure. I have leukemia and all of a sudden one day all the numbers clean up and I'm miraculously cured and I no longer have leukemia and it never comes back. So that would be a cure, right?
Mm-hmm.
Healing is, I mean, you can define healing in so many different ways, but I'm just going to see what definition pops out of my brain in this moment. Healing, I think, has to do with wholeness, right?
Okay.
So there might be parts of you that are askew or a little crooked, or parts of you that, from trauma in your past are not integrated. So
Mm-hmm.
in this moment, I'm considering healing as a sense of wholeness. And when we feel whole, we probably feel at peace. We probably feel free, right? And it doesn't really have to do with any particular emotional state, right? I might be happy, I might be sullen, I can have all of those emotional things, but underneath, I feel at peace and I feel whole. So that would be in this moment, I think, my definition of healing. So that when I die, whenever that is, I am leaving this lifetime and this body feeling at peace and whole and complete.
That's lovely.
Yeah. So that's what I would say, right? And that can happen whether or not I have a Western medical diagnosis of some kind of terminal illness or not, right? Some people die, you can die at any age, right? You can die of quote unquote natural causes, old age. There are people that all the time die healthy and they die in their sleep and it's time for them to go. There's accidental death, there's terminal illness. So I think that our goal could be, no matter what state of health we are in, our goal could be always healing. I think that could be an intention that we can carry with us is, I'm intending to be continually healing over the course of my life so that I become more and more myself, more and more whole. I had a Jungian therapist named Mary Bowen. She was one of the Pilates elders, and she's also a therapist. And I saw her for some time when I lived in New York City. And I remember a friend said, Jen, I'm kind of worried about you. You keep like, what are you running from? You're always going to Thailand and going to teen camp. And it seems like you're always leaving, are you running from something? And I thought, gosh, I don't think I am, but maybe I am, and I remember talking to Mary Bowen about it. And she said, well, let's think about that over this week. And I saw her the following week. She said, I was thinking about you, Jen, and everybody's got their thing. She said, I've got my cats, my husband's got his soccer, and I think your thing is questing. You quest. I said, oh, I like that. And I told my friend, we decided I'm not running from anything. I'm just questing. And my friend said, yeah, I buy that. That's great. So, and sort of my always, I kind of gave you, I've got all these different backgrounds, right? In the arts and the healing arts and massage. And then I did weddings was my main thing. And now grief is my main thing, but they all weave together. And I think that, I'm gathering these different threads together and they all come into play in grief work.
Yeah.
So I think, and Mary had said to me, Jen, you're just trying to be more Jennifer. And I think that's what we're all trying to be. Like, you're just trying to be more Angela. I'm just trying to be more Jennifer. We're all just trying to get back to the unique authenticity that is us. And I think that returning to our true selves is also healing, right?
I was going to ask you a question, and I think you've answered it already in that is life in itself a journey of healing,
Yeah.
But let's add on to that and say, how does entering a journey of grief impact that journey of healing?
Yeah. So in my belief system, how I see things, when we have a major loss, whether that's a death of a person that we love, the death of a pet, the ending of something else, like the ending of a job we love, losing a house to a fire, whatever that major loss is, there is a grieving process that will happen. And we can decide to willingly go into the grief process, declaring it a healing journey. And when we say, you know what, I'm not going to run from this and I'm not going to push it away and work 80 hours a week and do my best to run from it or get through it as fast as I can, right? Which is
Right.
sort of the, traditional kind of Western industrialized way is to, what's the quick fix? When's this
Mm.
going to be over? But that was the invitation that my mentor, Dr. Lewis, had given me was, Jenn, you can take grief by the hand. This is when my dad died. So my dad lived for 3 years and then he died. Um, and even though he had stage 4 cancer for 3 years, tumors all over his body, I was still in shock. I had never lost something as big as a parent in my life. And I had no idea how to grieve. I had no idea. And I think so many of us can relate. There was no handbook, there was no course in school, and I didn't have a cultural or religious or spiritual background to hold me. And I remember going, what do I do? Like, I have no idea. What container is going to hold me in this? If I was Tibetan, wouldn't I be reading the Book of the Dead or something? If I was Catholic, my grandparents were Catholic, wouldn't there be a rosary or something and a priest or something? If we were Jewish, wouldn't we be sitting for a week or what? How does this work? So luckily I had Lewis, at least I could call. And I said, I don't know what to do. And he said, you can sing, you can dance, you can drum, and I thought, I don't really want to, my dad's done. I don't really want to do any of that. And he said, well, you can take grief by the hand and you can walk with grief all year long through every birthday, every holiday, every milestone, every season. And you can let it teach you.
Mm.
And at the end of the year, we'll hold a ceremony for you and your mom. And I thought, there was something when he said that, my whole body relaxed, like, oh my gosh, I have a whole year to soften into this process, right? It wasn't daunting. It was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to rush because, we had 11 days or something from when he died to the memorial service, right? It was like a short amount of time. And I think some people can relate, right, to that kind of thing. Well, we've got a burial or memorial, or you got to get the prayer card. What are you going to say on the back? Are there flowers? Is there a donation? We have to write an obituary. And then there's the death certificate. And it's like, I'm grieving this person if it's the death of a person. And then there's all this stuff to do. So that's just too much, too fast, too soon, which is a definition of trauma, right? And that can happen with a person or a pet. So the fact that I could slow down, I tend to run a little slower than the average revolution of people around me often. So it's just like, oh gosh, I can have some time. And that felt very much like a healing intention to take a whole year. So I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I loved the invitation and I really took it to heart. And every day I'd ask myself, okay, grief, what do you have to teach me today? And I was a yoga many years, yoga meditation practitioner. So I was used to particular practices for a certain amount of time, right? Like a morning sadhana practice, right? Whether that was doing yoga asana movement practice or meditation or something. Of course, I didn't feel like doing anything after my dad died, but luckily we had Daisy. She was a rescue dog and she was still alive after my dad died. And she actually stayed with my uncle for a little bit right at his death because For him, it was like too much to have people around or even the dog around. My dad just wanted some space. So we got Daisy back from my uncle, and then I started taking her into the woods, and we would go. And this was healing for me. Um, I got to take her, and she really got me outside because I would have just sat on the couch like a big lump of lead, after he died. But because we had Daisy, she had to go to the woods and run. So I would get to the woods every day and let her run in circles. And I'd go the same loop that I used to go with my dad. And that felt like a healing act. Like every day I'd go out and walk those same paths that I used to walk with my dad. And
And
I remember,
not only was she giving you an opportunity to get out and move
mhm,
and get those essential vitamins that we get from the sun,
mhm.
but she was also a connection to your dad.
Yes, absolutely. And she was his rescue dog, right?
Mhm.
So um it was a connection to him in both of those ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then she left you.
Yeah, so she lived for some years. We didn't exactly know how old she was when we got her because she was a rescue. Uh,
Mm.
uh, she was a couple times rescued. um, they said, well, she might be 2 or 3. We're not really sure. And she acted very much like a puppy.
Hmm.
Everyone thought she was a lot younger. And when she died, it was like, gosh, how old is she now? She's got to be 8 or 9 or 9 or 10 or um, but she lived for several years after my dad died, and she got to meet my son. I had a son in 2015. Um, my dad died in 2012, and Daisy got to meet my son and hang out with him as a baby and a toddler, and um, and she and then she had some kind of cancer, also some tumors in her belly, and then she died as well. So, um, and it's interesting, right? When we lose a being, whether it's a person or a pet that's really close to us, um, you know, when she died, it was like a piece of my dad. Another piece of my dad died because my dad was so interconnected with this dog that, when Daisy died, it felt like I lost more of my dad. Um,
Absolutely.
and even I have, so when my dad was alive, when I moved home to be with him, when he was diagnosed with cancer, I had lived in New York City. So I didn't need a car. I gave my car away before I moved to New York City. Then I lived in Ashland, Oregon, small town. I didn't buy a car because I could walk everywhere. So when I moved back to be with him, they both had 2 cars and my dad was barely driving. So, we just shared the 2 cars. And after a year or so, he said, we could really use a third car. So he bought my uncle's car, and basically gave it to me. Like, here you go. So it's a 2006 Honda Civic that I named Silver Crow, and I'm still driving this car. It's got, over 250,000 miles on it, something 230,000 miles. I don't know. I just got it taken for an oil change, and my mechanics like, this car is going to last you forever. It's a Honda Civic, and I
Woohoo!
I don't want to get rid of this car.
No.
Both my mom and my son are like, when are you going to get a new car? When are you going to? I said, I don't want a new car. This car is like the last connection to my dad because
Mhm.
Daisy the dog died, George the cat died. Um, these pieces of him are gone. So
Mhm.
the car is sort of a connection to him.
Yes.
I remember him driving in the car with me, and that was a gift to me. So it's interesting how objects can also bring up grief.
Oh,
He
it's wild.
right. So he had a business, and his business, he had pens made, like really nice ballpoint pens. My mom found them and gave me a pen, and the other day it stopped working. Like the ballpoint got jammed up, and I went to write, and it wouldn't. I couldn't twist it back down, and I started sobbing because the
Mhm.
pen didn't work, right? So I just want to, if you're listening to this and you feel like, gosh, am I crazy for crying because the pen won't work? Or, so no, it's grief hits us in a wave whenever it does, however it does. And that is totally normal. And you are not alone. And there is no timeline. It's not supposed to be over in 6 weeks or 3 months or 1 year or whatever it does. However long it takes you is how long it takes you. And even, my dad's been gone over 10 years and I just sobbed over this pen not working. So just know that that is okay. Your tears are normal. They are welcome. They are healing in and of themselves. So I can't tell you how many people have apologized to me for crying, right? Whether they've gone through a loss or whether they're at their wedding, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm crying. Right? We apologize just for standing sometimes. You go to the grocery store and there's a woman in front of the spinach. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for just standing here. So right. Can we give ourselves some softness and just let ourselves be where we are? And when we cry, and know that that is normal and it is healing. And you can do that whenever you want or need, no matter when it is. So that is a message I would like to share with all of the listeners who may be feeling any amount of grief over anything in this moment.
And I want to validate you in two ways, in that you're part Canadian. So if you find yourself apologizing all the time, that's just natural.
Is that Canadian? Is that a Canadian?
Yeah, it's very thing. Yeah, we just say we're sorry to everybody for everything. And but in addition to your attachment to the car, I had a 2005 Ford Escape, and that was Shep's car. I bought that so that we could go adventuring, and he died in 2014, and then it was on its last legs, and I was facing having to give it up, and that was making that transition was one of the hardest things I've done.
Yeah.
And there's a rational part of your brain that says it's just a stupid car.
Right.
But then there's the other part of your brain that's so emotionally connected to all of the stories that you were able to have and tell because of that car.
Yeah.
And it's hard.
It's hard. So how can we, just really give ourselves some gentleness and welcome all those pieces of ourselves, the one that feels this way and the other piece that feels that way. And then how can we, I can think about, when this car, when its time is over, what can I do to honor it? And what can I had a friend recently who lost a bunny who their family had this bunny for years and years and years. And it, lived out on this porch, and she thought of, she's going to get this, she got a sculpture, and she's going to, there were different ways that she thought, how am I going to memorialize this? So, there are different ways that we can really honor those stories and honor those people and pets and things that have had meaning to us. And how can we share that? And you had mentioned writing and journaling before we pressed record. We can write letters, we can journal. So there's a few different ways that I hold space with my clients. I have a year-long program, a heal immersion program for folks who've gone through loss, that helps them to, one, honor what's gone, two, learn practices to really ground and be in the moment. And those are skills that we need for our lifetime. And then how do we move forward and through and be with our grief and walk with our grief so that we can get to the other side and free up all this creative potential within us. Because when we're not allowing the grief to move, when we're locking down after a loss, we're like holding, we can have emotions stuck in the body. We can really, we can get sick over this, right? So how can we soften and open and let the energy move through movement, right? Walking or any other kind of movement, And then we can let that move through our mind by sharing, telling stories, and also journaling. And you can free write, right? Like morning pages, and just let your pen go, and just put a timer on and go, I'm going to write for 7 minutes or 15 minutes. You put a particular number of minutes, or say, I'm going to do 3 pages, and just write whatever's coming so that you just let it out and you can be aware and see, oh, this is what's happening right now inside me, right? Um, Another way that you can do this, and I would just offer up one more invitation, and this is something that I've given some clients who have had a major loss. You can still have a dialogue with a being that's no longer in physical form through writing. So, for example, and you can do this with your pet, but you may do it in a different way with a pet. You could do this writing practice, or maybe you go out on the same walk that you've gone, but you no longer have your dog, for example, and you could do the same loop and still talk to them like you might have, right? And just kind of feel their energy or their presence with you. For writing, you could write a little letter, right? And say, dear whoever it is, to your mother or to your pet. And then just share all of your what's going on for you. This is where I'm feeling, this is what's happening, and then you can pause and have them write you back however they would address you. And then you can receive their words back. And that is a really healing practice. I've experienced this. I've done writing back and forth to even my own soul, right? Or the soul of my business, or that, right? So you can have a dialogue in this way. I had a client who lost his mother, and he used to call her every morning at a particular time and was really suffering. So what I offered to have him do is to write her every day at that time. So when he was feeling like, oh my gosh, I would be calling my mom right now, instead he would sit down and write exactly what he would say. Hey, mom, this is what happened yesterday, last night. Here's what's going on. But he would write all of that, what he would have said to her. And then she would write back. And then what would she say? You know? So that is an invitation that I can offer if you're listening, and, you could use some support around a loss. That might be something that you could try. And that could be a daily practice.
And I did. I wrote a eulogy to my truck. Some find that a little bizarre, but I did.
Yeah, wonderful. Yep.
It has been a big part of my life. But I've also been a professional writer for 30 plus years. Putting pen to paper is easy for me. How can you encourage someone who is already so wrapped up in their emotional and spiritual pain to let go of that block that says, well, I'm not a writer?
Yeah. What I would say is do what works for you. So energy needs to move. If you don't like to write, then, if you came to me for some help and you were in my programs, or you were a client of mine, I wouldn't probably make that an offering. I wouldn't invite you to write if you didn't like writing. Right. Mm-hmm. So if someone is a dancer, I had a client who loved dance. And she ended up in this year-long process of saying goodbye to her husband. And we had a really beautiful podcast together. She tells the whole story of his Parkinson's and dementia. And she ended up creating a whole dance and choreographing a 5-minute dance to him. So she didn't write, she danced. Beautiful. So, I have other clients who are artists. One is a painter and spends a lot of time painting. Another one has created a whole diorama, whole sculptural thing. So whatever brings you back to life, right? Whatever moves energy for you that you're going to want to do, some person's going to love dancing, another person's going to want to swim, right? Another person will do qigong. So, as long as you are honoring yourself, being with your emotions, allowing them to flow in some way, whether that's moving, making noise, writing, whatever that is. Actually, I can offer up your folks. I have a 7 steps to walk through grief with grace, a guidebook actually it goes through 7 different things you can do if you're experiencing a major loss and you don't know how to move through it, right? And maybe writing is not your thing. So, that's something that you can get off the Walk Through Grief with Grace website. There's a little get my free guide, and there's 7 steps, right? So it's just important, right, to make noise. It's important to keep breathing, however that works for you. Some people want to go in a float tank or go to the ocean, or other people get massage, right? Whatever helps you to breathe, to move emotion, that's what you need to do for yourself. The other day I was not breathing very well. I had a lot of stress in my body, and I made it to a restorative yoga class, which, if you don't know what that is, they're bolsters, blankets, blocks that really prop your body up, and you stay in reclined, relaxed positions for a long amount of time. And that really helps to open the body and to help it to breathe in a really gentle way. So that's what I needed the other day to help energy move through me. So yeah.
To take the name of your program, Walk Through Grief with Grace, quite literally.
Yeah.
When we have dogs, one of our activities is walking with our dog.
Yes. Yes.
Can it be healing to continue that walk even after they're gone, but acknowledging how difficult it may be to put the shoes on when you're so used to having your fur baby right by your side?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that can be really hard. And, you'll know what's right for you, but that might be an invitation to try. If you took your dog out every morning before work and now your dog's not there, what if you still put your shoes on? And it'll be really hard when you go to reach for the leash, but you don't need the leash, right? But can you still put your shoes on and go on that same walk? Just like I did when my dad was gone, can you still go on that same walk? And if that makes you cry, great. Let yourself cry through the walk.
Mm-hmm. Where can people find you on the World Wide Web?
Yeah, so you can find me. There's we've got over 60 episodes now on the Walk Through Grief with Grace podcast. So you can find me on Apple or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're a podcast listener, I'm guessing you might be, since you're listening to this. You can just look up Walk Through Grief with Grace. And that podcast, can be, I want that to be a resource for people moving through any kind of loss. So that's one way to find me. My website is the same name, Walk Through Grief with Grace. And that's where you can find the 7 steps to walk through grief with Grace guidebook. That's a free resource at the top of the page there. And then the other place you can find me is if you're active on Facebook, there's a private Facebook group called Grief and Grace. Somebody else has the business page, but I have the group, Grief and Grace, and we have community on there. I offer free tools. I have seasonal free workshops and half-day retreats for people who've gone through loss. I do teaching for the community on there, and that's a great way to stay in touch and receive support and community that way. So I invite you to join the Grief and Grace Facebook group.
Before I ask you the one last big question, what is grace, and how do we show it to ourselves?
What an amazing question. What is grace and how do we show it to ourselves? I think grace can be this beauty and benevolence and softness and gentleness that can support us And it might come in a surprising way, or it might come by asking for it, right? Asking for help when we are suffering or struggling. Um, and actually looked up the other day synonyms for grace. And one of the synonyms for grace was thankfulness, and the other was gentleness. So I think that one of the ways we can give ourselves grace is to soften. And when we're really hard with ourselves, or unforgiving or unrelenting, how can we soften and lean back and rest? How can we give ourselves more rest? These are all questions to ask. If we're grieving, it takes a lot of energy. There's a lot of emotional output. People wonder, why do I feel so heavy? Why am I so exhausted? That's normal, because grieving takes energy. So you really need to rest a lot more than normal. And normally our bar for rest is way too low anyway. So we usually need more sleep at night. We need more rest during the day. We need to restore ourselves way more than we're doing. We go way too fast. We do way too much in general. So when you're grieving, you need to really, it will knock us off our feet, because we really need more rest in general. So can you soften? Can you give yourself more rest? Can you be gentler on yourselves? And I believe those are ways that we can give ourselves grace.
Why is the self the hardest person to show grace to?
Gosh, I have no idea. I don't know. Yeah, why? I don't know. That's a great question.
What is one last piece of advice you can leave our listeners with?
Well, I think that was it, right? To really open up to the idea of being kinder to ourselves. And, if that feels a little strange, we could think of it as, if we have a beloved pet, because I'm sure so many of the folks listening have beloved pets, right?
Mm-hmm.
How do we see our pet, right? If we have this pet that we love so much, it doesn't matter what they do, right? If they scratch something up, or they, chew something up, right? We love them anyway, right? They're cute no matter what they do. My son was just showing me this ugly dog contest, right? Even if the dog is so ugly, oh, you're so ugly, you're so cute, we just give so much grace to our pets, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how can we give ourselves the same generosity of heart that we give our pets? Let's give ourselves at least that.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I appreciate you for coming on to the podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was really a pleasure speaking with you, Angela.
It is so incredibly difficult for some of us to show ourselves grace. I'm one of those people. Society, our parents, they place a lot of emphasis on achievement, success, perfection. For me, when I'd bring home an 85 out of 100 on a test, my dad would say, "What happened to the other 15%?" My parents wanted me to be the best I could be. They wanted more for me than what they had. I get that. But we end up feeling like our worth is tied directly to our achievements, and falling short of expectations can be paralyzing and can lead us to being excessively critical of ourselves. Any misstep, any failure indicates that we are not enough. But we are enough. And do you know from whom we can draw inspiration for that mindset? Our pets. Cats, dogs, horses, or goats. They don't hold themselves to unrealistic standards or expectations. They don't wish they could be another dog. They don't wish they could lose 10 pounds. If, like them, we embrace who we are as we are, with imperfections and mistakes made, we can learn to give ourselves a little more grace. And remember, they also don't care if we wish we could lose 10 pounds. They love us for who we are. Speaking of love, next week I have the honor of hosting Julie Scher, an expat American now living in Spain, who serves the LGBTQ2S+ community as a growth and mindset coach. She shares her journey as a member of the queer community, her experiences with grief, and the love she carries in her heart from Avery, the shepherd mix who was with her for 17 years. Until then. I'm Angela Schneider, owner of Big White Dog Photography in Spokane, Washington, and your host at One Last Network, signing off to go get some Bella snuggles. Listen to One Last Network on whichever podcast platform you prefer. We're on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Music, and Amazon Music. Don't forget to hit follow or subscribe so you don't miss an episode. If you have a friend who might be interested in our content, make sure you share us with them. Thanks for listening.